What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and a lot of you all have been asking me to cover Dear Becky, which is basically the continuation of the Boys series, not in the traditional sense. Two things that I want to make clear here. The first is that this will have spoilers for the Boys, so if you don't want to have anything spoiled for you, then as much as I hate to say it, turn the video off now. Granted, this is spoilers for the Boys comic, so the TV show may be entirely different. There's a few things about the show right off the bat that look like they're different. What they're going to do with Black Noir, I don't know. I'm kind of hoping we get the comic book thing, but I don't know if we will. But regardless, that's the whole thing there, right? So you may end up getting some spoilers here, just FYI. The second thing, if you are a parent and you hear me talking right now, do not let your child watch this video. Because this is not for the kiddies. I've done my part now. If your child watches this video anyway, do not get mad at me, get mad at yourself for being a bad parent. So here's the thing. What this does is this initially opens up with basically Huey in Scotland. Now, for those of you guys who remember from The Boys, that was kind of the conclusion of it all, right? The Huey and Annie ended up getting together and they took off to Scotland and presumably just lived happily ever after, or as happily ever after as you can get after all the stuff that they went through during the Boys series. But you have Huey here who's having a conversation with a friend of his, Bobby. Now, because this takes place 12 years later, this is around 2020 or so. And so what this means is a lot of the current culture going on right now is a point of discussion here. And that's one of the things that Garth Ennis always focuses on in his comics, right? Those are the guys who are familiar with Garth Ennis's writing. He doesn't shy away from ruffling feathers, right? And in all honesty, he's not really wrong. People need to be offended from time to time, if for no other reason than it reminds them their viewpoint is not the absolute right viewpoint, despite what their echo chamber will tell them. And two, they're not as important as they think they are. And so it's a kind of a necessity in society, kind of a correction, a societal correction that happens from time to time. And so Garth Ennis was always a proponent of that. And one of the first things that he talks about here is, again, like this idea of woke culture. And it's kind of funny because you have this conversation between Huey and his friend Bobby, who's a transgender woman. And the idea of woke culture from Huey's perspective is he's like, it's a load of crap is what it is, right? It's just white folk inventing ways to feel like they're making a difference before they screw off to the suburbs and start, spitting out a whole bunch of kids, which is kind of true. We as a society, as people, we come across things that we deem to be absolutely important, right? Especially in our 20s. We're like, this is an exceedingly important thing. And then a magical thing happens. We turn 30 and we have kids, families, we have a house, we've got bills that need to be paid. And suddenly those things that were the most important things ever, because there was really nothing else that seemed as important, stop being important because we have other things that are more important, right? It's just kind of the way things are. So again, it's just one of those things that go on with society as a whole. But they kind of debate back and forth. One thing to understand, do not misconstrue the relationship between Huey and Bobby. I don't know why I called him Hoey. Let's call him Hoey from now on. Do not misconstrue the relationship between the two. I am not from Scotland. As I understand it, like friendly conversation, friendly banter between people from Scotland, we in the States would consider to be kind of offensive, right? Because we're so soft as people. Out there, they're a lot more intense, right? They are a lot more just kind of whatever, just tell you what's on their mind, that kind of a thing, more brash in their conversation style. So while we may look at it and say, damn man, those guys must hate each other, they're being dicks. The reality is that it's just kind of how they conversed amongst each other. And honestly, I take Garth Ennis' word for it. As far as I'm aware, he is Scottish, so he's kind of rooted in that culture, which is why he's able to write the characters in such an interesting way. But one of the things that happens, of course, with Huey being a friend of Bobby, and while it is really more of just a general conversation, kind of friendly banter back and forth, really more of a debate than anything else, when they get to the bartender, that guy is a prick. He's like, dude, I hope you guys, I pray every single night you guys catch COVID-19 and die. I hope you get cancer of the dick. It's just like, dude, this guy's awful, man. But the overall gist of this conversation, though, and this is one of the things that's so cool, right? Once you get past the things that you're looking to find that will offend you, you can actually look at it as a greater whole, and you come to this realization that it's a very somber conversation between the two. Because one of the things that they talk about here, right, one of the things they kind of discuss is that with everything going on, Huey himself hasn't quite asked Annie to marry him yet. And she kind of seems to be sort of coasting along with the idea as well. At least that's the whole perception she puts off. But he can't really bring himself to do it just because of the things that he's experienced, the things he's seen. And the reality is the two of them can't really have kids either, things that had gone on with them when they were younger. Now, this isn't Garth Ennis saying like any woman who cannot have children is not a woman worth marrying. That's not really what he's saying. What he's saying here is that for the two of them, taking the traditional approach, the kind of old-fashioned approach to relationships, which is to say, boy meets girl, boy meets boy, girl meets girl, whatever, and you date each other for a little while, basically to see whether or not you like each other. And then after that year or so of liking each other, you usually move in. And that's a test run to see whether or not a marriage actually works, right? Can you tolerate the other person's existence in such close quarters? Do they snore? Do they fart obnoxiously? Just different things like that. And if at the end of that test run, you come to the realization that I can tolerate this person living with me, sleeping in my bed, or us sleeping in the same bed or what have you, then you get married. And you do that, hopefully, for the rest of your life. The reality here is that traditional stance doesn't really apply to them because kids can't necessarily be part of the equation. They've come from some pretty traumatic experiences from their own personal experiences, as well as the kind of things they dealt with, right? You guys remember the whole idea of Annie and the Seven, that she idolized the Seven. She believed the Seven were like just heroes. Now that's because she was a simple farm girl from back in Des Moines where life was basic and she didn't really understand how the world actually worked. So when she got there to the Seven, she was presented with a choice. Either she could engage in sexual intercourse with the guys who were in the Seven, or she could not be on the team. And she chose to engage in sexual intercourse so she could be on the team. It rocked her to her core, right? The choice she made was a choice that she ended up regretting, but at the end of the day, it was still a choice she made, and that affected her on a personal level. You move that into the territory of realizing just how dark and sinister things are when it comes to the Seven in this world, right? That the heroes that she believed were heroes are actually just people who were corrupted by their own celebrity status. It just totally changed the way she saw everything, and it made her pretty dark. And so with Huey, it's very similar, right? Coming across this really dark and twisted world, and the kind of things he did when he was part of the boys, it really changed him. And so looking at those kinds of things, the question that he kind of asks here is, do I even want, even if I could have kids, would I want to bring them into this world, right? Because the conversation transitions over to, I guess the ocean or whatever it is, but they're on a beach, right? Having this whole thing. And as they're talking about this idea of the Seven and Vaught American and how it all seemed to kind of come crashing down in the sense of the superheroes and the world's perception of them and all that kind of stuff, right? That the boys kind of serve their purpose here, that in the end, the agreement they come to is it's not really going to do any good. And the reason why is because the Seven were just a symptom, right? The Seven became what they were because at their core, they were people. And it's people who are inherently flawed. It's people who are inherently broken. Again, Garth Ennis is very much a cynic. And that's one of the things the boys perfectly highlighted his cynicism. That when he looked at people, it was kind of people are screwed up, right? You don't the human race doesn't need superheroes to destroy the world. Just look at the state of the world, right? The COVID-19 pandemic hit in the boys' universe and the entire world shut down, giving no thought to what would actually happen when they did. And then when the whole world was shut down, nothing was being produced or anything like that. And then suddenly the world was opened back up and the most logical scenario happened. The economy just went into almost free fall. There was just total freezing up of virtually every resource across, literally nothing was available. Everything became ultra expensive because of scarcity. It's just the result of people doing things and giving no thought to what they're doing, right? They talk about climate change. Half the world is on fire. Nobody really cares, right? I mean, because it's not affecting them on a personal level. It's a very, very, cynical perspective of humanity. People screwed up the world, not superheroes. And so it's one of those interesting things where it really is just kind of a damning critique of humanity. And so once Huey gets back home, what he ends up discovering is basically a package that's been delivered to his house. Now, of course, he ends up going and sitting on the john, as we all do, right? Whether it's our phones or books, whatever the case is, reading material. It's necessary. I don't know about you guys. Sometimes I sit so long that my leg goes numb. So when I stand up, I feel like I don't have a leg. Surely I'm not the only one who experiences that, right? I'm not the only one out there who loses the ability to walk after sitting on a toilet for too long. But the thing about this is as he goes through this journal, this diary, he realizes it belongs to Becky Butcher, the wife of Billy Butcher. And for whatever reason, it's been sent to him. More so than that, what he discovers here, and it seems to have been sent here intentionally, because there's a whole journal entry in here where Billy Butcher basically wrote a letter to Becky. And so that's where things are interesting, is because what you get here is this really interesting monologue by Billy himself, right? He says, "Dear Becky, I feel a bit strange writing to you like this. I feel even stranger writing in your diary because it's something that belonged to you. I never even knew that you had it. but it was yours. When I read what was in it, I went completely blood spare. I've never been more angry in my life, but it's something that was yours, and even touching it makes me feel the ground's moving under my feet because you're gone. And so it's one of those things where as he's kind of addressing this and discussing this, Huey sort of shies away from it. Now, one of the things to know, and the reason why Huey kind of reacts the way he does, is because Billy Butcher scared the hell out of Huey, right? That's one of the most important things to understand, that Billy Butcher, as you see him in the show, is pretty accurate to the comics. In the comics, he had, I think, a little more of a darker sense of humor than what you see in the TV show, but they're not that dissimilar. And unlike Huey, as you see him in the TV show, sure, he's got conviction and he's got a kind of strength of character. In a lot of ways, Huey was very, very cowardly. Not in every way, but in a lot of ways. And what this meant was that Billy Butcher, just being this dominating force over Huey, in a lot of ways scared the hell out of him. So Huey's PTSD comes just as much from Billy Butcher as it does anybody else. And reading this diary of Becky, this letter that Billy Butcher wrote to Becky, kind of scares Huey, because it's like, well, what if Billy Butcher catches me, right? Because Billy Butcher was always there, always kind of lingering around a corner. He would show up when you would least expect it. So that kind of fear still sticks with Huey in a lot of ways. And so what he says is, people of course would be surprised to learn that I could read and write at the same time. He says, but you would never have said anything like that, right? You were the only one that really and truly believed in me, God help you. He says, you were the only one in the whole bloody world I could talk to, and you still are, because this is the only way that I can think of to do this, because I think maybe you're not gone. He says, I know that you're not lingering over my shoulder, right, watching me or anything like that. He's like, I mean something else. And so what this does is it really transitions into this idea that in a lot of ways, Becky is with Billy Butcher insofar that she's his conscience, right? She is the conscience that kind of keeps him in check, that keeps him from going too far down the path. Because one of the things to remember is that a lot of what Billy Butcher does is a result of the death of Becky, right? The fact that Becky died the way she was. Again, Becky was basically sexually assaulted by Black Noir, even though it was believed to have been Homelander. And then of course she died when that just weird superpowered baby came out of her, literally blew a hole through her with his heat vision, and she died, right? She was killed. And so Billy Butcher always harbored that as the reason why superheroes have to go. Because when that happened, it was all swept under the rug, right? Nobody knew. Billy Butcher was like the only one who really knew. And it was like, so long as companies like Vought American exist out there and superheroes are allowed to operate with impunity, this will never change, right? What we have to do is inject accountability into a system that completely and totally lacks it. Now, one of the things that I also want to specify is this little bit right here with this younger kid. This takes place before Huey comes on the scene. So this is kind of that period, that interim period, following Billy Butcher's desire to basically destroy the superhero community, or at least bring it down, and before Huey joins in. So we're talking about the history of Billy Butcher here. And one of the things that we get is that they've basically tracked down this younger kid. Now, we will find out exactly what's going on with him. We'll find out why it is they're here in the first place. But quite literally, one of the things to remember is that The Boys was brutal. For those of you guys who never read The Boys comic, we did the uncensored version on Patreon, but we did the censored version here. Even the censored version was kind of stretching it a little bit. The uncensored version was insane. But when it comes to The Boys themselves, it was a brutal story. The way in which they would go after heroes, right? The way that they would blackmail, whatever it is that they had to do, they didn't care. It was whatever it is they needed to do to get the information they wanted, or to take out whoever they needed to. This is a perfect example of that, because what happens is this tongue gets pulled out of this mouth and it's literally held in place by the female. And then Billy Butcher with a razor blade cuts it off. And so obviously right off the bat, you know that like this kid's power has to do with his ability to speak. The way that this is kind of explained to us is that while they're sort of going back and forth and having this discussion, Billy just, of course, is always being Billy, right? It's always like, okay, so like we've basically taken care of this kid. What's the next one, right? What's the next target, Mallory? Like again, Mallory leads the team at this point in time. That's one of the things to remember, is that by the time the Boys series had picked up, Mallory was out of the picture and it was just Billy Butcher leading the Boys. And in a lot of ways, that's where things kind of went off the rails, that Mallory was able to provide a direction for the team. Like, here are the people that we're going after. We're doing it strategically, and each and every person that we target, it serves a greater purpose. When Mallory was out of the picture and it was just Billy Butcher leading the team, it seemed all bets were off. And Billy's just like, we're hitting every last one of them, right? All I care about is achieving that particular goal. The kind of finesse that Mallory brought to the scene, the sort of organization and structure that Mallory had, was completely lacking. And so that's why the Boys team under Billy Butcher seemed more chaotic. It seemed more just kind of all over the place, no real rhyme or reason, no structure or organization or anything like that. And under Mallory, it was a lot more organized and structured. And so again, Billy Butcher just kind of being Billy Butcher Butcher here, what we find out is this is all a front, right? This is all kind of a facade to a degree, right? That what happens is like in the midst of all that you end up having this kid who basically starts just shouting this word. Now, obviously with a lack of a tongue, it's difficult to make out. You can put the pieces together. If this kid had a tongue, he'd be saying Shazam. So obviously this is a play on Billy Batson. That's one of the things to remember for those of you guys who never read The Boys. All the various depictions of the superheroes you see are pastiches of existing superheroes. It's basically Garth Ennis answering the question, what if like Superman and Wonder Woman and The Flash and these guys were corrupted by their own popularity, their own celebrity status, right? That sort of a thing. So obviously this kid is just trying to say Shazam but doesn't have a tongue. His powers don't work. But you switch back over to this letter that Billy's writing to Becky, and he says, so I'm standing there looking at him or it even, I don't know, and I don't really see people with powers as being people anymore, but he says, I'm watching it stand there and spit and just trying to kill us with how much it absolutely hates us. And I'm thinking, yeah, this is them, right? This is what superheroes are actually like. This isn't what the VOD, what VOD American shows the world. Joe Average's perception of heroes, right? The positive slant. This is who they really are, right? This is the version of heroes, how these people actually are that only me and the boys really know about. And he says, this is what makes it easy for me. He says, but the next thing I know, I'm thinking of something else. And this is Becky basically coming in as kind of the conscience of Billy Butcher. And he says, there's no way I'm going to say this to Mallory and any of the other boys, but no matter what he's done, no matter that he says his stupid bloody word and gets 5 times bigger and then basically just starts assaulting people in a variety of different ways, he's still just a 10-year-old kid. And I know why it is that I'm thinking that. And the reason why he's thinking that is because that's Becky. That's his conscience saying he's just a 10-year-old, right? He's just a little kid. He doesn't know any better. This kid never had a chance. And so he says, I hate talking about soups and all this stuff with you, but if you're with me in the way that I think you are, then you see it all anyway. He says, you're still there, Becky. All the good stuff that you've done for me and got me to believe about myself, that's you. And I don't know why, but I feel like you're getting stronger and that you're not going anywhere, at least not anytime soon. And he says, but you see, I just can't have that because the way things are looking with the soups, they're going to get worse, which means the things that I'll have to do are going to get worse. And so he says, God forgive me, but I think that what I've got to do is kill you. Now again, he's not talking about killing Becky literally. She's already dead. What he's talking about doing is killing his conscience, killing that part of him that speaks up and says, you can't do this kind of stuff, right? I mean, they're just a 10-year-old kid, or that person didn't know any better, or they're so young, or that person can be redeemed. Killing that part of himself. And this is huge because it explains how it is that Billy Butcher got to the point when we first meet him in the beginning of The Boys, where he spares no morality when it comes to superheroes, where he's like, they're all the same. Every single superhero out there is the exact same. They don't get any benefit of the doubt. They don't get any kind of morality or anything like that. They are there for a purpose. And when that purpose is served, if they live to see the dawn, it's because I allow it. And that's basically it. So with that being said, guys, this is the first issue. We still got 7 more to go. Let me know. I thought about doing this on a weekly basis where we just cover it every, one episode every week. That's what we're going to be doing with the Kang series. And that's what we're doing with the Dark Crisis series from DC. So let me know if you want to do the same thing here, or if you want me to just push it all through the whole week and then we just kind of cover stuff intermittently in between. Let me know what you guys think. But with that being said, we're going to bring this to an end and I will catch you all later. Peace.